And just like that, it's Thursday again. How the heck does Thursday come around so fast? I don't know. I'm wearing a hat this evening, and I'll tell you why I'm wearing a hat, because my hair looks rubbish. It just looks bad. And I thought, flat cap, perfect. That's what I want. Although, and this has got nothing to do with the show, I'm just sharing it to you, right? I'm Russ Kane. This is the ABC of CBD, here exclusively on Men's Radio Station, episode 102. Oh, yeah, episode 102. I went and I was walking down one of my favorite streets in London. It's called Jermyn Street, and they had a moving sale, right? And I bought a cashmere version of this hat. Cashmere, it was 50% off. 50% was a bargain. Walking my dog, the wind came, blew it straight in the river, straight in the Thames, right? My beautiful cashmere hat. So I went back. I said, oh, I'd like another of those hats. 3 times the cost. What? I didn't get it. I just got normal sort of guy. You know him, ladies and gentlemen. For 102 weeks, you have loved him. He is the Count of cannabinoids. He is the hunk of hemp. He is the Maharaja of marijuana. He is Ollie Mammon.
I love that story. I've literally been sitting here creasing. You poor dude. You thought you were treating yourself.
I was so furious. My beautiful hat.
So
I've got a rule. I tell you, I got it. It was a cashmere hat, right? It was 50 quid. Absolute bargain. 50 quid. Right? I went back to the same shop and they said, oh, yeah, we've got it in stock. So I said, oh, great. How much? 150 quid.
Can I just say one thing, Russ? Do you feel like you're one of those people who's not allowed to own nice things, and whenever you buy yourself something nice, something bad happens to it?
Yeah, I know.
So I'm one of those guys. Whenever I buy anything nice, you're like literally 24-hour shelf life. Buy a piece of crap, lasts me my whole life.
Oh, forever.
But anything nice, I try and buy myself. Brand new suit, rip the pocket first time I wear it.
Of course.
Really nice, like patent leather shoes, like with the shine, you can see your reflection, scratch right down the middle. Like I physically cannot own something nice. So like, let's treat myself. Always backfires. The fact that it went in the river, it's not even like you could get. It's not even like it's destroyed. It's just gone. Do you know what I mean? It's like
my friend says. My close friend says to me, "You do realize that on that section, I've got lots of ducks and wild birds that nest." And they're like nesting on my cashmere hat.
That's quite nice. At least some little ugly duckling is going to be born into.
Good afternoon.
Some little ugly duckling is going to be born into your cashmere head garment.
I'm just so annoyed. The wind. It doesn't matter. Anyway, let's pay some rent, and then we're going to bring a fabulous guest.
I'm sure you've heard before that good quality CBD needs to be really, really expensive. This is the new view of CBD, a product created by users for users, a product at an affordable price, available everywhere, at any time, at the simple click of a button. Just CBD and MCT oil. No additives, no preservatives, and no flavor enhancers. It's a simple subscription-based service, the cleanest possible CBD delivered to your door for the lowest possible price. Your product, your rights for the lowest possible price.
I do like that ad.
I do like it too.
I do like that ad. Now,
so you haven't met our guest yet, have you?
I have not. Well, I had a brief chit chat just to make sure we could see and hear this guest of mystery.
But she's been on the show before.
I don't know where I was.
It's one of the many times you decided to abandon me.
Probably, yeah. It was like, I can't face Ollie this week.
So Ruby is a journalist. Okay, so Ruby is a journalist in our space. She writes a lot in our space and has done over the last few years. I believe last time she was on was about a year ago, and she was talking about like how there are a lot of people writing about this space who don't understand this space. She spoke about her experiences. I'm sure she'll touch upon it again today, but she had a child. Her child actually didn't end up using cannabis medication. I think her child had some form of reflux issue, which was quite bad, like quite early on. And she did a lot of research into alternative medicine, stumbled upon cannabis, and she kind of opened her eyes to it. Now, not as a cannabis mother, but just as someone who wanted to kind of shine more light on this subject. And over the last few years, she's put pen to paper and she's done a lot of writing within the space. And actually recently, which is pretty amazing, she's just been published in the Times. So when she was on the show last time, which you missed, she said, I want to be the voice of this space when it comes to writing. I want to own this space. And she was quite like strong about it. It's like she knew exactly what she wanted. And I'll be honest with you, last week when I opened the newspaper and I saw her, I was like, good on you, Ruby. You know, like it's kind of amazing because, you know, we see it quite a lot in this industry where people have an idea. A lot of people will shoot down that idea. They'll think, well, how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
You know, Ruby was never she's not like a journalist who's turned into a cannabis journalist. She's a concerned citizen who did research, who turned herself into a writer, who then turned herself into the cannabis journalist and
fantastic,
the cannabis writer. But she's got a great soul.
And what
she's
is
got a great
moral
story.
there, young Ollie Mammon?
Sorry?
Moral is don't let people tell you no.
Exactly. But let's bring on Ruby.
It's so important. Just one sec before we bring on.
Don't bring on Ruby then.
No, I'm just saying this. It's really, really important. Don't let people pee all over your dreams. Don't let them rain on your parade. You know, starting a radio station, 2 radio stations, men's radio and women's radio, from scratch on paper, absolute madness. And everyone said, you're mad.
Never going to happen.
Never going to happen, right?
How are you going to compete in the space?
How can you do this? Just follow your dreams.
Exactly.
Just follow your dreams. Ladies and gentlemen,
Ruby
without
Deevoy.
further ado, Ruby.
Hello.
Hi, Ruby.
Hi. Oh, you just dropped some wisdom, Russ. I was listening to you talking. Here's some wisdom. Get all your clothes and hats from charity shops and eBay.
Yes. Let me just tell you what somebody,
Ruby,
let me just tell you what somebody picked up in my local charity shop. I know that's not why you're here, but just one human being to another. My local charity shop just gives to the very local area, which is why I love it. So there's no overheads, there's no CEO at the top earning 150 grand a year. It's a lovely little local charity shop down a little road, right? During lockdown, I thought, I'm never going to wear my suits again. I'm never going to wear when am I ever going to wear a suit again? This is nonsense. I grabbed them all from the wardrobe and in a big magnanimous gesture, dropped them all off at the charity shop. Oh, thanks, Russell. There you go. Right? I get back and I tell my pal, and she says to me, you didn't give away your Oswald Boateng beautiful suit, your favorite suit. I thought, no, of course I did. I jumped in the car. I drove back. I was there within 10 minutes. It had gone. I completely gave away my favorite suit by
Get great things from charity shops.
I know. So someone picked up an Oswald Boateng suit for about £3.
So I love charity shops. I'm like Mr. Charity Shop. I can't physically pass a charity shop without going in. Now, you know, I don't know if anyone knows this. So my past life, my family business is antique dealing. So that whole bargain hunting side of me is
like, he likes me.
It's insane. So some of the things I found in charity shops are epic. I actually recently found this really beautiful cashmere peaky hat, which I thought was quite cool. No, I didn't really. But no, but I love charity shops.
Don't do that when I've got a mouthful of
coffee.
Coffee.
How you been, Ruby?
That's it.
Yeah, good. You know, slogging away as usual. You know, it's funny. You know, it's like working constantly. Completely broke. Like everybody thinks that when you're a journalist, you earn loads of money, and you know, if you think, like you were just saying, I've had that piece in the Times. Everyone thinks when you're in the Times, you've made it. Like someone was actually saying, journalist dream, and it's just like, yeah, the dream of, you know, working loads for very, very little money. Yeah,
Ruby, I got a lot of pals who are well-known actors and actresses, and we tweet each other. Some of them I haven't met, but we tweet a lot and just that and the other. The number of them, so you're not feeling alone, who were asked, even at their stage in life of success, are asked, could you do this? Well, how much is it? Well, there's no money. Well, why? Yeah. Are there expenses? No. Well, why should I? Yeah. Why am I doing this? This is nuts.
It's the pyramid, though, isn't it?
It's just rubbish. It's
rubbish. The pyramid. Everyone at the top makes money, and as you go down, everyone thinks because, you know, Brad Pitt can charge 20 million for a movie, or that, you know, John Grisham can charge $1 million for a book, that anyone who's acting, but anyone who's acting or writing kind of is, you know, has access to the same sort of financial remuneration.
Ruby will probably know. No, it's not true. Ruby will know. What do you think? I'm going to ask Ollie this question. Ruby, if you don't know, have a guess. what is the average earnings of an author in the a writer, and not a journalist, a writer of books in the UK?
Oh,
What's the
God.
average earnings?
35 grand
Probably.
a year.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
I
take-
don't know about that.
Second guess,
Not
Ruby.
much.
Ruby Deevoy, you're going for that microwave oven and the fondue set.
Well, it depends on like how well they're.
Must take your
done.
first answer. Sorry, we've got to go to a
All right.
commercial break.
£27,000.
You're closer. I'm going to give you that. You don't get the holiday in Barbados. It is, in fact, £14,000.
Yeah. Nuts. It's nuts.
There's another
It's
reason
terrible.
why it's another reason why most writers have part-time jobs. Do you know what I mean? Like,
You got to.
or full-time
unless
jobs.
Unless you're massive, unless you're an Anthony Horowitz, Sophie Hannah,
and
you got to.
And this is why we have so much poor journalism as well, because you just literally, like, how are you supposed to put the time and effort that's needed into a proper piece of journalism when you don't get paid for it?
Because
I mean, like,
you have to have your own standards. Your own standards. And if you let those standards drop, you're not a proper writer. I know.
Yeah, no, but it's ridiculous. Like, this piece I've just written for the Times, right? I've been working on getting that published since August. And that's been, there were 6 interviews involved in that, which obviously took a lot of time, multiple drafts, trying to get it, out to different places. I had to go back and forth with the Times until like they kept saying they were going to run it and then they weren't going to run it, and I had to keep pushing it. I get paid about 200 quid for that.
I was going to say they're going to get 200 quid.
Yeah.
I was actually going to go wild, Ruby, and say 250. Oh, I know, it's an absolute joke. It's an absolute joke. Remember, Ollie, you wouldn't know, but Ruby would know, that you would write an article, and if it was a big deal, they'd give you $5,000. If it was a really like a good double-page exclusive, 10 grand.
Yeah.
And now they'll say, 200 quid. And
because
you go, whoa.
Because there are a lot more writers, there are a lot more platforms, there are a lot of people creating content for free. And when someone creates content for free, and they're a relatively good wordsmith, you have editors who are like, I could take advantage of that. Now, what I basically wanted to start with was, you kind of just hit it quite accurately. When you were writing, right, so like when you first started writing, you were writing within our space, you were doing a lot of blogs, you were writing for companies who wanted you to write articles, you were creating and disseminating information that was requested of you, all right? And what happens is you were basically, you were given a subject or you were given a topic, or you went off and did a piece of writing yourself, and you knew where to position it within our industry, because within the walls of our industry, we're relatively accepting of new notions, new education regarding our industry. Having left the walls of our industry and having gone into mainstream media, how has your dissemination of information, how has the framework around that changed? Because like you said, drafts backwards and forwards, and them saying they'll run it and then not run it and they'll not run it. I assume that's based on the topic. And I assume that's based on the fact that it is a relatively new topic to start reading about within the Times. When you start, like your article was on, psychedelics and, post-traumatic stress disorder and, the journey that a veteran soldier took in order to like clear his demons and clear his PTSD. It's not an everyday subject. Now, within our industry, within the walls of our industry, it is an everyday subject. It's something we talk freely about. It's something which you could speak about at expos. It's something which you could write about in majority of publications surrounding our space, and have very, very, very little control around your words. How have you found the shift away from our open-minded free speech industry outside of the walls into a more controlled fashion of information dissemination?
Well, I mean, it really depends who you write for, and also kind of like I think I was saying this in our last when we last spoke. You really need to know how to write within the tone of the publication to be able to say what you want to say while still meeting what they want it to sound like. So not scaring
them away. That's the subtext. Ollie, is not. You want to get your message across, but you don't want to come across like some sort of radical, because they won't like that. And it's got to be within the sphere of their tone. You're absolutely right, Ruby. Absolutely right.
So when you say their tone, you're talking about like a socio-economic political tone. So there's like every publication has got their socio-economic political stance, or like do you understand? I'm just trying to get an understanding of what you mean.
If you
by that
had,
tone.
oh, sorry.
I mean, yes, that's part of it, but I think it's as much of that. It's also literally the voice of the publication. So they have a tone like they're speaking to you, you know. So it has to be within what they might speak about. Now, I was really, really pleased in the end with what I managed to say in the Times, because it was kind of outside of what they might usually say. I mean, a lot of the coverage that they do of like cannabis and psychedelics is quite negative, and this was really a wholly positive thing. But I think, you know, I was able to do that because it was such a strong story, and it was so interesting. And, you know, there is this huge kind of psychedelic renaissance going on. There is this huge kind of surge in research. And so I'm kind of able to reference that and talk about stuff that really is going on. We're getting to the point now where you cannot argue that cannabis and psychedelics are doing these amazing things now, because the research is there and it's solid. And, you know, you still get people pushing back and saying, no, it's not. You know, like even, for example, I was speaking to New Scientist recently about a pitch, and, you know, I'm doing my usual thing with them where I'm like a dog with a bone. I will not leave them alone now until I get that pitch. I've got someone to reply to me, so now I'm just like, go, send them everything. But, you know, she said to me that they're really, really cautious about running stuff on cannabis because, I can't remember it, but she basically...
Oh, we lost you. Oh, there you're back. You're back.
Still there? Have I lost you?
Yeah,
So repeat what you just said about cannabis. You know, they were reluctant to run stories on cannabis
because
Ruby,
can you hear us?
See us? We see you.
We see you. Ruby, speak to us. Oh, she's back. Ruby, can you hear us?
Oh, I can't see any of you.
Uh-oh. We can see you, but you've got your hand over the lens for some reason.
She'll come
there
back.
We go. She was rather marvelous.
That's quite interesting from like to hear that, because like it was interesting for me to see a article in the Times heralding psychedelic mushrooms as being so positive, and the information we've seen around cannabis has mainly been commercially focused. If you think about most of the stories, which are, you know, unless it's like a wonder story about how cannabis has saved a life, most of the stories which have filled the media have been like economic based stories. You know, cannabis taking over the world, billion-dollar industry. You know, cannabis company sells for $60 million. Cannabis company sells for $5.7 million, and it's been very.
What was the biggest one? 5.3 bill.
5.3 bill, yeah. And it's like
it's so interesting. You know, when I talk about this show to other people, and they still in their head, as I did when I came into this 102 shows ago, think it's somebody in a BMW with blacked out windows and thumping music. And I said, how much do you think the last company sold for? And they went, oh, I don't know, 50 grand, you know, 20 grand. I said, yeah, 5.3. And they went, what, million? I went, no, billion. And suddenly you have their attention. They go,
like
what?
Small cannabis companies sell for 10, 15, 20 million pounds.
It's
like
incredible,
small cannabis companies. It's mental what this industry is.
Let's see if we can get Ruby back. Let's see if we can do this. There you go.
Hi, Ruby.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Don't apologize.
Nothing.
So you were saying that, you know, when you're like a lot of these newspapers, like when they write about cannabis or
yeah,
you know, so you were saying
New Scientist, wasn't I? New Scientist saying that. So yeah, even New Scientist, a huge publication all about science. They say we're really careful about running things on cannabis because the science just isn't solid enough. And I'm just like, what the hell are you talking about? Like it is, it is. But you know, it's still.
So can I ask you this? Just acting as everyman as I do every week, is this. New Scientist is not run by a load of twerps. They, you know, they're the brightest guys in the room. They're not stupid. It's the New Scientist. You know, it's not Shed Weekly or something.
Mm-hmm.
Why would they say that? What is behind that?
I mean, like I was just talking about this morning. Actually, it is incredible what prohibition has done. I mean, just 100 years of cannabis prohibition has been tremendously effective. The campaign has been the most effective campaign of all time. It's just so ingrained in our culture and society that this is bad. You know, people view cannabis as being worse than heroin a lot of the time. It's like the dirty drug that will make you go mad and whatever. That is purely back to reefer madness. You know, that is based on nothing at all. I mean, like, even the worst things you could possibly say about cannabis are not as bad as the worst things you could say about alcohol and tobacco. And they're just not. You know, even, you know, looking at schizophrenia rates and addiction rates and anything like that you could bring up, all of which are things that should be acknowledged and should be talked about, because, you know, you can abuse cannabis, and cannabis can speed up the onset of schizophrenia in people already predisposed to schizophrenia, particularly young men, but so can alcohol, and so can nicotine. So why is the focus all on cannabis? And to say that we don't have enough research in it is just absurd. I mean, I can only think it's because they don't specialize in cannabis. They haven't looked into that. They are assuming that because that is the line that we're told, but it's not true, you know. And anyone you speak to who has done their research and is one of the researchers who's working in this field will tell you there are tens of thousands of studies. We are very, very familiar with how cannabis works and what it does in the body and its therapeutic potential tremendously. So,
Ruby, do you ever find that when you smash down one of these brick walls of, you know, like, you know, these brick walls of anti-cannabis, let's just call it, you smash down one of these brick walls, you basically reach another brick wall, which is twice as thick and twice as high, which is holding down the same illogical logic. And then you kind of smash through that again, and you get to the same wall again, and then the same illogical logic, and you're always fighting the same arguments with the same people. And it's almost like, you know, yes, you know, like you're educating one person at a time, but the education's not getting it. So it's almost like within 3 months of COVID hitting the world, everyone knew COVID was bad. All right. And then within 3 months later, everyone knew COVID was mild. And then a year later, everyone knew COVID was nothing to worry about. But like
whoa. That's not true. That's not true, Holly. COVID is not something not
fine.
to worry
but
about.
The mindset of people was it's irrelevant now. The transition between thought process.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Don't say sorry. The transition between thought process has happened quite quickly. We've gone from, you know, if you think about when we started in 2020 to now, in 2 years, we've gone up and down, and opinions have been changed, opinions have been formed, opinions have been changed, opinions have been formed, opinions have been changed.
Because everybody, it's important because we're going back to, you know.
I've got a point. Let me finish.
Right.
So I'm not talking about COVID. I'm talking about the notion for human beings to have an opinion and change it. All right, I'm using COVID as an example, but as human beings, we have the ability to create a opinion, and we also have that ability to change said opinion, as we can see over the last 2 years, where we've created and formed loads of opinions which were negative, and now we have loads of opinions which are not so negative and not as, you know, self-controlling. All right, there are loads of things. You understand what I'm trying to say? So the ability for human beings to change their thought process is there. It does exist. What I don't understand is why they're not in regards to cannabis.
I think using the COVID analogy, I think that's really interesting, because personally, what I have seen from this is more how people are told to think, and they think what they are told to think. So, for example, let's look at masks. They're told it's dangerous, wear a mask. Every single person wears a mask. As soon as they say you don't have to wear a mask, no one wears a mask anymore. That's not people thinking for themselves. That's not people thinking, okay, I need to protect myself and others. You know, I'm going to wear a mask, or I'm not going to. That's saying.
I've got to jump in on behalf of Men's Radio. On Monday, mate.
Sorry,
on
Ross.
Monday.
Okay, I know. I'm sorry, everyone.
No. On Monday, my guest was, and she's often been on the show, Dr. Sarah Jarvis, who is one of the most respected experts in this field. And I asked her all the questions that both of you would have wanted to know. And I said, well, what's the deal with masks? Because I stopped wearing a mask. And the deal with he said, blowing his nose, the deal with masks is as follows. No, it will not stop you receiving germs from somebody else. It won't, unless you're wearing a really high grade, I think it's called an N94 or something.
Yeah,
unless you're wearing that, if you're wearing one of the thin masks, you're wasting your time. You wear it as a courtesy to other people, so that when you sneeze and cough, hopefully it's not spreading. That's the deal with
Like
a mask, which is a different way than was told. Initially, wear a mask or you're going to drop dead. And we all went, oh, okay. But that's now that's been replaced.
But my point is not shouldn't you wear a mask? So that's and that's another topic entirely. My point is, one minute you're told to do something and everybody does as they're told, and the next you're told to do something else and everybody changes what they were doing, regardless of the fact that they believe that a mask is the right thing to do. They wear a mask, and when they're told it's safe now, the next day, or you can wear it in this space but not in this space, they suddenly follow those rules. And this is a great example of people doing as they're told. These people, obviously some people will have gone off and done their research and fully understood which masks work, which masks don't, formed their own opinion. Most people, however, will just have been told this is what you do, and then they do it. So most people do that.
So Ruby, if I'd have said to you in 2019, tell you what, Ruby, I'm going to come up with something, and I guarantee within 4 weeks I can control the entire population of this country. You would have said, Russell, I don't know what you've been smoking or snorting or drinking, but you're as mad as a March hare. The fact was, under COVID, and some people say it's the Great Reset, some people say, it's a virus, but outside of the fact that it's a virus and was real, what it proved is you can control an entire nation like that.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm
you
talking
put
about.
An entire nation under house. If I said to you, Ollie, I'm putting you under house arrest, and you'd go, what? No, you're not. But you did, and it worked. It's quite extraordinary. When historians look at this period in our lives, they will go, how on earth did that happen? That's
1,000,000%.
That's what's so. I think you've frozen.
Who, me?
No, not
Ruby?
you. Oh no, you're back. I thought you'd frozen there for a minute.
There we go.
There you go.
But
it is. You see, it all links back exactly to what you're saying. Is if you tell people something and you tell them often enough, it becomes the truth. Whether it is the truth or not, that's another matter. But you can convince people it's the truth. Which goes back to Ollie's excellent question of how did you get to this? And your brilliant point, the prohibition, wonderful phrase, the prohibition has been so efficient since the 1920s.
Yeah, it's incredible. And, most people don't know where that started or why that started. Most people don't know anything about the research or who did this supposed research, who performed these studies to tell you that cannabis does this, that, and the other. And
gone again. The only reason is Ruby is sitting in a cafe. And I guess, hang on, I'm going to do it properly. She's sitting in a cafe, and I think the internet in the cafe's a little bit latte, frappe latte, espressochino.
She'll be back in a second.
She will be back. What an intro! I love your guest.
No, like Ruby is awesome.
She's
like
great.
Ruby is literally awesome. I mean, some of the things she's done in this industry, some of the things she's written about. I mean, and just her determination to be. That
if you're not determined, really don't bother to start the journey.
It's very hard to be a journalist anyway, let alone being a journalist in such a specialist field. If you think about most journalists, they'll write around an area. They'll write around economics, they'll write around crime, they'll write around an area which is very vast to, pick this new world age, this new age world medicine, new world age, new world order medicine, whatever they call it. This whole idea of non-conventional plant-based medicine. It's a tough, nut to
While
crack.
Ruby
And
reboots, let me ask you a question. We've covered it before in our 102 shows, but I'd like you to just run through it. For people who maybe have not joined us before, you're ever so welcome. How did the prohibition start, and why did it start?
so the prohibition, how did it start and why did it start? So there's multiple different, you could call it multiple different factors. You had, like hemp was growing in America. It was used industrially, it was used therapeutically, it was used medicinally. It wasn't really controlled. It was just another plant. It would be like dandelions or I don't know,
Wheat. Would it
wheat.
be like
It
wheat
just,
or
it
something?
just
Just a
used to
plant.
grow. It just used to grow, and it used to be very ever present. It was used religiously as well, and like it's been around for thousands of years. And then with the rise of the cotton trade, the rise of the tobacco trade, the rise of the pharmaceutical trade, I mean, it's like you start to create these competitions. Now you have Mr. I grow hemp, and I have grown hemp for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and I've got Mr. I can now grow cotton. And Mr. I can now grow cotton did not like Mr. Hemp because hemp is theoretically better than cotton. But cotton enables you to, run that business, as you do it. I'm not really a farmer, so it's not really my field of expertise. But what happens is they then end up having a war and Mr. Cotton beats Mr. Hemp. And next thing you know, hemp becomes illegal from that perspective. Then you have Mr. Tobacco goes against Mr. Hemp. Because why would you what would you rather smoke, tobacco or hemp? Mr. Tobacco offers the government more money. He gets his license. Mr. Hemp's taken off of the scene. Then you have like the pharmaceutical. You have Mr. Pharmaceutical versus Mr. Hemp, Mr. Cannabis. Cannabis, concoctions and remedies are taken off of the market for more standardized pharmaceutical products. That comes in. So you have this notion of control. They couldn't control the hemp industry. They could control cotton. They could control the cotton. They could control other industrial applications for other
tobacco, obviously.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one because, like she says, it's the brainwashing was so the brainwashing, the market control has been so intense. If you think about it, it's like sometimes when I say these comments, I feel like I'm like losing my mind a little bit. Do you know what I mean? It's like you say, Mr. Cotton. Mr. Cotton controlled, basically destroyed Mr. Hemp.
When you first put this, when I didn't know as much as I do now, and it's all thanks to you, not thanks to me in the least, I started to think, oh, this is nonsense. This is just ridiculous propaganda. But it's not. It's not. It's not propaganda. What it is the truth.
So it's like Henry Ford. All right, Henry Ford.
Henry Ford said, "I don't like." If he said,
"No, Henry Ford,
I don't like horses."
But Henry Ford designed the first Ford. Okay, had many components. Many of the parts were made out of hemp. So they had, hemp fiber made the seats. There were I think he even designed an engine to run on some form of hemp biofuel. I mean, there was a big energy push towards it. But what happens is then Mr. Ford gets an offer from Mr. Gasoline. Okay, and Mr. Gasoline is like, hey, why don't we work together on this? I'll make you rich off of it. And then Mr. Ford's like, you know what, screw it, fuck it, let's do it. And then you understand what?
It's no different. Don't forget, Ollie.
It's just business at the end of the day, isn't it?
In the 30s and the 40s, in fact, even earlier, but we'll leave that aside. They had electric cars. They've had this for decades and decades and decades. Does it suit the petrol industry, the oil industry? Of course it doesn't. It's a disaster for them. So it's been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Whether you believe in it, electric cars or not, that's not the point. What I'm saying is, again, it's a parallel to exactly what you're saying. Is if you've got one vested interest, the oil industry, versus another new technology, they're going to be down on it.
Another thing, when you have a multifaceted crop, all right, and this crop can be used for a. Hey, Ruby, she back?
No. I'm looking. I don't think.
Okay,
I think
fine.
The internet's so bad there.
So basically, if you can, I say you've got a crop, and this crop can be used for multiple purposes, right? Going back 100 years here, it can be used for multiple purposes, and the it's relatively sustainable, and also it lasts a long time. So like hemp fiber clothing lasts longer than cotton clothing. It's a more durable material.
Okay.
From a commercial perspective, it's probably better to use a more replaceable material.
Sure,
it's like that
because
whole idea.
you want built-in obsolescence, like
Exactly.
like with mobile phones. And with
Exactly.
cars.
And
Same
I
thing.
believe it was all done commercially, because from a commercial perspective, what's better, to get someone hooked on a pharmaceutical or to give them a cannabis they can grow themselves? Can't hear or see either of you, I'm afraid. Let's try and bring her back on and see what happens.
There's nothing there.
Okay, fine.
I can't. Believe me, the moment I see her little punim appearing on my control screen, she will be back on. She keeps trying, but nothing's happening, unfortunately.
So
there we are.
No, it's interesting. All right, so 25 minutes left. What can we talk about without our guests?
There's a million things to talk. There's a million things to talk about, because one of the things we don't often touch on in depth is how. All right. Overarching thing. I don't watch the news because there is no news. There's propaganda. I look at it. I investigate myself, and I don't want someone coming on the news and giving me their interpretation of it. I'll work that out. I'm over 21, just a bit. Okay, so there's not that. The notion of propaganda around this, which I didn't know about, and to be honest, initially I was very, very skeptical when we started this series a couple of years back. Very skeptical, and the more I've realized, all your guests can't be wrong.
The amount of personal stories we've heard, which is it's like personal propaganda. So this is like propaganda used to people. So let's use one example. Philip Anthony Bevington.
Oh.
Okay. All right. When his doctor turns around to him and says, you can't consume cannabis because cannabis is going to kill you.
And he just
after telling him that he's already going to die.
Right? Yes. Let's not sweep by that. It's so important. This man in his 80s, severely not well. The doctor says it's probably going to be fatal, Mr. Bevington. He says, well, I'm going to go and get some medicinal cannabis. Well, you can't do that. Why not? Says Mr. Bevington. Well, it'll kill you. And he says, sorry, 3 minutes ago, you just told me I'm going to die anyway.
And like you've got very short to live, basically.
You've got to, yes. I mean, this
was
is
about
not like,
5
we're not
years
talking about
ago.
10 years' time.
5 years ago, he was given
go.
6 months.
Gee,
okay. And 5 years later, he's still alive.
Let's try again, Ruby. You're back.
So what we were just talking about your notion of propaganda, okay? And we were talking about Philip Anthony Bevington. Just so I put propaganda, because Russell's saying that he's not very. He found it very. It's the hardest thing he's found to kind of understand is this notion of propaganda around our industry. All right, and he said that now he believes it, but when we first started off, he found it didn't really get what we were talking about. And we just gave an example of this like deep-rooted animosity towards cannabis, which is ingrained in our system. We were giving an example of a doctor who turned around to Philip Anthony Bevington after telling him that he's about to die and told him he can't consume cannabis because it will kill him. All right. And that whole idea that he's already dying. You've just told the dude he's dying, but yet in your mind, cannabis automatically revamps every fear you've ever had as a doctor. And it makes you tell your dying patient that he's going to die anyway. But he's already dying. You've already told him he's dying. But the cannabis is so much worse than the failing kidneys that's what really creates fear in the doctor's mind. Not the fact that your patient's dying of kidney failure, the fact that he might consume cannabis. That is where the fear comes into the conversation. And that's not propaganda that is ingrained propaganda. Like when you turn around to someone, you're like, listen, I'm going to throw myself off of a bridge. You know what? No, I'm not. I'm going to smoke a joint. You know what? I think you should throw yourself off the bridge. It's better. That's basically the logic. The logic is that cannabis is worse than any bad decision we can ever make. And, it is fully ingrained. Sorry.
There's another great example of that. Not great, horrible, awful example of that. I can't remember if I talked about it last time, but there's a little boy up here in Scotland who has a very severe epilepsy condition. As you know, that's one of the common ones that cannabis oil is used for. The children with this basically untreatable epilepsy, and he was having so many seizures that he couldn't speak, he couldn't walk, he couldn't function at all. And they were basically saying that he tried all the different drugs, they weren't working for him. His next step was to have brain surgery that would leave him completely paralyzed. right? And so his mum, who was an ex-police officer and was completely anti-cannabis, really thought it was terrible. She basically put a call out saying, look, I want to do anything I can possibly do for my son. I don't want him to be paralyzed. I don't want him to not have a life, you know. And so many people kept coming back and saying, cannabis, look at cannabis. And so she was like, okay. So she looked at cannabis and she did the research herself, found out that actually there was very little saying that it was bad, and there was a lot saying that it could be incredibly helpful for epilepsy. So she started giving him, I think it was, I can't remember the story, I think she went to the Netherlands to get cannabis oil, or she started with CBD oil and then moved on to cannabis oil. And his seizures stopped, as is so common with these children. They completely stopped. He started to thrive. He was well, and you know he continues to take it now. They pay, I think it's nearly £3,000 a month for the privilege of giving him this oil. But he plays football. He does taekwondo. He has a life, you know, totally normal life. However, he will not get it on the NHS. All of the doctors have said no. They say he can have this surgery that will leave him paralyzed, but we won't prescribe him the cannabis oil that we know makes him live a normal life. And he's prescribed other medications that are considered specials, so unlicensed medications, but not cannabis oil, which is exactly the same thing, because obviously cannabis is legal on the NHS, supposedly. And there are other children with his very similar condition who are prescribed cannabis oil. Only three of them, but they are there.
How much would it cost the NHS to care for a disabled, to care for what's it called, a paralysed individual? It costs more than £3,000 a month.
Yeah, a lot more than £3,000 a month. If you think about it, intensive care and ongoing treatment, and then there's not only the actual health treatment costs, but the socio-economic costs as well when he's older, you know, when he's unable to work, when he's unable to contribute to society.
Well, he's never going to, is he? He's never, ever going to do any of that. It's a lifetime of help. That
he is.
Is she still a policewoman?
No, I don't think so. I think she is full-time looking after her children now. So she's a single mum of two, paying £3,000 a month for her child's medication. If he doesn't take that medication...
Question. If the NHS said, you know what, you know, this is a good idea, let's do this, it wouldn't cost £3,000, because presumably, as with most things with the NHS, they combine quantity. So they don't have to be going over to Holland on a boat and coming back from Holland and all the rest of this palaver.
It's also Bedrocan's not the only option. Bedrocan is a trademarked or a what's it called, a trademarked, a licensed version of a product which you can buy, well, actually quite freely. You know, like broad spectrum extracts, full spectrum extracts don't cost half, a quarter, a tenth of what these pharmaceutical cannabis organizations are selling them for. So I've actually recently bought a broad spectrum extract, and we did a comparison with Bedrocan. Very, very, very similar. And what's costing me about £1 or £2 a gram is costing the end consumer about 15-20, and which is kind of mental when you think about it. So that's the other issue within our industry is, you know, like a lot of these larger cannabis companies are not really, you know, like operating any differently from the pharmaceutical companies who we all loathe. So that's the other side of it.
They're not a charity.
True, but there's a difference between not being a charity and taking full advantage. You know what I mean? Like, you have the ability to, there's enough money to be made. You know, you're talking about 15,000% profit. Do you know what I mean? When you've got 15,000% profit, there's enough margin. You can make 2,000% profit and you're still laughing. Do you know what I mean? And the product will be like 15% of the price of what it was before. It's a crazy world we're living in. It really is. Ruby, let me ask you about writing. That's why we've got you here. So you've taken this move now. You're writing a lot outside of the industry. Fingers crossed, you know, like this Times is the first of many, many, many newspapers, because you know how much I love your penship, and you know your penwomanship. I don't know what the word is. Penmanship. That's actually a word, right?
Penmanship's okay.
Yeah, fine. So basically, you know, I love the stuff you write. I think you're very, very good at what you do. Are you still doing a lot of writing within the space, or have you focused most of your energy about trying to educate and disseminate information to the less educated people outside of our little sphere?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of writing within the industry for industry titles and for brands and whatever. But you know, my favorite thing to do is to write articles about cannabis and now psychedelics as well for mainstream titles, because that's how you change things. I mean, when it's interesting writing for industry titles because you get to write about kind of the, you know, dig deep into the more unusual subjects, and kind of you got to find things that aren't covered, you know, go beyond the basics.
I assume also you must be a little bit more free, right? When you're writing within the industry and for industry platforms, you're less controlled and there's less editorial control over what you actually get to write.
Yeah, I mean, saying that, recently it's not been too bad. I mean, with this thing with the Times, it was pretty much what I wrote. You know, there was some minor kind of switches around in the kind of format of it, but you know, they took out a few bits and pieces here and there, but nothing that was, you know, desperately needed. It was still pretty good with it, actually. But interestingly, getting stuff published about psychedelics is much easier than getting stuff published about cannabis. It's much better received.
Really?
A million. I have to agree with her on this. There's something going on at the moment. Did you see How to Change Your Mind? Yeah, fine. So, Russ, you need to watch this documentary or read the book. It's freaking epic. But basically, there is this resurgence at the moment for basically everything outside. Like it's just like everything from you know, mushrooms, LSD, MDMA, ketamine, psilocybins, mescaline, like just ayahuasca. I mean, like, but it's talking about it in a way which is, it's not new. So I mean, like, there are research studies from the 1950s, okay, and there's like real information, and it all falls under the same propaganda. And it's like, listen, I actually personally would still never experiment with those types of substances because of my fragile psyche. I wouldn't. And as a educated individual, it doesn't.
So glad you said that.
No, hold on. As an educated individual, like the one thing I got from that is people who are extremely fragile and know they're fragile and are susceptible to, you know, psychological issues beyond what they're going through now, potentially shouldn't actually venture down that road. It's not for everyone. However, you know, most medicines are not for everyone. You know, most compounds which exist on this planet are not for everyone. Cannabis is not for everyone. You know what I mean? Like, there are people in this world who are allergic to water. Do you know what I mean? That there are people who have adverse reactions to sugar. Seriously, like people have allergies to everything. People have adverse effects to a whole bunch of different actives. So, from a personal perspective, I wouldn't consume, but I do understand more why people do. And I do understand more the confidence in these products and the resurgence in education around this subject. And Russ, I do think it's something you would be interested in, because, like, we had a guest on my daily show talking about this very subject, and it was a little controversial. No, it is controversial. I'm not saying it's not. It's a very controversial subject. But there is something there. And I'm not saying it's for everyone. I'm not telling everyone just to go and start experimenting. But it's definitely worth learning about. And
so I mean, it is a total, like, psychedelic assisted therapy is a totally legitimate and, I might add, legal therapy in this country with ketamine. So there are clinics in this country where you can go and you can have ketamine assisted therapy now, and that's for mental health conditions. Obviously, it's not suitable for everyone. However, in saying that, it can be used and is regularly used to treat mental health conditions like anxiety and depression and PTSD
I
and
asked the
addiction.
guest, you see, what worried me, Ruby, and you both added the caveats, it's not for everyone. And it's not. We've got to be very clear about this. It's not like taking an aspirin. So I asked this guest.
By the way, aspirin's not for everyone. Aspirin's not for everyone.
All right, take it.
No, but it's true. If you have like anemia or something like that and you take an aspirin, you can die.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm just like every active ingredient on the face of the earth has its limitations. And it's quite important to know that. And I'm not saying from a preachy perspective of you have to try this. I'm talking about from an educational understanding perspective of it's important to know. And Ross, over the last 102 weeks, you know, we've opened up eyes and we've opened our minds and we've opened up the minds and eyes of other people doesn't necessarily mean you should go and try cannabis, but you should definitely understand that if
also,
someone, if one of your loved ones is.
Yes, but the 102, well, no, probably around 120 guests over the last 102 weeks, they're coming from a position of knowledge. I'm always worried when I say to somebody, and what's your medical background for this? And they have none. That's what I was worried about with the interviews that I did.
No, listen, there's always going to be someone who preaches before they think, and there's always going to be someone who focuses on all the benefits without actually thinking about the limitations. That's just the way we are. We have optimists, we have pessimists, and then we have realists. But, you know, in reality, understanding is very valuable, and then you can understand if something is for you or isn't. And all I'm saying is the way in which Britain is reacting to this new world of, you know, psychotropic medication. I mean, it's warming to it a hell of a lot faster than it's warmed to cannabis.
Then you have to ask yourself the question. I want to ask Ruby this: why? Why is this suddenly acceptable, and yet something which is, on the face of it, much milder, with less potential danger, not acceptable?
I think there's two big factors here. I think one is that the cannabis prohibition that we talked about was far bigger campaign than the kind of fight against psychedelics, which was kind of dragged along in the mud with the kind of general war on drugs. That was, you know, it all shut down then as well. But the thing with cannabis, and I you know, this is my own personal speculation. I think that maybe the thing with cannabis is that cannabis can be used so widely for so many different things. So whether that's health conditions, you know, anxiety, depression, epilepsy, you know, skin conditions, stomach conditions, whatever it is, and then there's hemp as well, the cotton industry, the paper industry, all of that. There's so much there that people stand to lose or make money on, and that's really how this all started, you know. It all goes back to this guy, Harry Anslinger, who was basically the chief prohibition officer for alcohol, who was put out of a job when alcohol became legal, and then he switched his interest into cannabis and basically lobbied for cannabis to be the new prohibited substance.
She answered your question, Russ. Yeah, she answered your question from before. Well done for that, Ruby, because I was drawing a bit of a blank. Well done.
Oh, there you go. So that's one of the roots of prohibition, okay? And then obviously it was cannabis, like being illegal, was then used to form a slave trade in prisons, and they could imprison people of color, you know, Black Americans. It was absolutely horrific, you know, how many Black Americans were imprisoned for cannabis use and cannabis possession, and just it was basically used to make slave trade in prison.
And then last week, when you sent me that, that thing when Biden's said he's going to release everyone from jail for cannabis possession. Do you remember you sent me that article?
Yep.
So I mean, it all falls under the same category, and I do agree with what Ruby's saying. It's a lot deeper. If you think about, as a child or as a parent, you probably turn around to your kids and be like, "Don't smoke weed." You probably didn't turn around to them and be like, by the way, if someone hands you some ketamine, coke, ecstasy, LSD, you know, those words probably never came out of your mouth. The whole idea.
I just put it under the umbrella of drugs.
True. But most people, when they talk about it, it's like, you know, cannabis is a drug which you can smell and you can see people consuming. And I feel like you can also see when someone is stoned because they're more likely to be around you when they are. And it's very much there in everyone's face. And I feel like these other drugs are not spoken about half as much, which means because they're not spoken about negatively, they can almost be that they're not as demonized as much. That's my
well, I think maybe cannabis was deliberately demonized more because more people naturally would use cannabis, you know, because it is a gentler experience than the psychedelic trip. You know, it's easier to use cannabis. It's far more commonly found. You can grow it in, I mean, obviously you can grow mushrooms and whatever in your garden as well, but, you know, people were using cannabis a lot before it was made illegal. It was in every medicine in the pharmacies, you know, it was in cough syrup. It was a widely used thing. So I think more effort had to go into the prohibition of that because it was so widely accepted until they decided it shouldn't be. Whereas psychedelics, you know, I think the idea of a psychedelic experience is more daunting to people naturally. because it is a more daunting experience, really. It's a bigger experience than smoking a bit of cannabis. But, you know, I think as well as that, there's also, of course, the fact that psychedelics are easier to patent than cannabis. It's, you know, they've already made synthetic psilocybin, you know, the active compound in magic mushrooms. So that can be utilized much more by pharmaceutical companies. It's much easier for people to
control.
Make a lot of money out of that, and control, than cannabis is. But, you know, I mean, psychedelics are a fascinating thing. You know,
that's another thing. Ruby. It's actually you hit upon something. The psychedelic space is being pushed by these larger pharmaceutical companies more. Whereas the cannabis industry is really being pushed by us, the grassroots industry, and investment is then
no
coming
pun
in.
intended.
Yes, no pun intended. Exactly, grassroots. Ha 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 ha. Definitely a pun intended. But basically, it's that idea that, you know, we have created this industry, whereas that industry is being controlled and being taken over by them. And the whole idea of being able to synthesize ketamine, which is already a synthetic drug, it's not grown naturally, and get it out there. Yeah, and get it out there to a whole bunch of hospitals. It's a hell of a lot easier than it is to get cannabis out there. It's also controlled dose, and it's like one of those. It's more in the chemical world of what they're used to dealing with. Same with all of these chemical. I think that's probably it.
Isolate compounds, you know, you can get the research that you need much easier than with cannabis. You know, it's really hard to do like double-blind trials on cannabis because it's such a unique smell and a unique taste and whatever, you know, whereas you can use a tasteless powder for these other ones, you know, for synthetic psilocybin or whatever it is that you're testing. And of course, ketamine is already legal. You know, it's a legal anesthetic that's used everywhere in the UK, in all hospitals, mainly for children and elderly people because it's so much safer than other anesthetics.
I thought it was used for horses.
It is. Lucky
horses.
Well,
that's But then there's the stigma that's attached to ketamine. So when people think of ketamine, that's a horse tranquilizer, but it's like, actually no, it's a really common anesthetic used in hospitals for people. That's its main use. It's not just for horses. It is also used for horses, but.
Well, you saw the trouble that Joe Rogan got into. He got into a world of difficulty talking about what he was taking, and they said it was for vets.
That's just one of the things that's used to scare people. You know, in reality, ketamine is one of the safest anesthetics because it doesn't suppress breathing or lower blood pressure like all other anesthetics do, which is why they use it for children and elderly people. It's safer for vulnerable people. And then when it's being used as a therapy for like mental health conditions and addiction, the dose is much lower anyway. And this is the thing, you know, using psychedelics was the original final step for Alcoholics Anonymous because the research was there even way back then for how it could help with addiction. And that was all shut down. The first research was being done in Russia, and that was all shut down, I think it was in the 60s. And that's only kind of just being reignited again. And what they're finding with using ketamine for addiction is absolutely astonishing, really astonishing rates of recovery for people.
And it seems to be instantaneous as well, which is kind of amazing. But it's one of the things, it's not about trying it, but it's about understanding it. And it's about realizing that we are in this time right now where a lot of hidden information, a lot of hidden knowledge seems to be rising back up to the surface, and a lot of suppressed information seems to be rising up to the surface. And it's just important to try and understand it. It doesn't mean venture down that road and listen and definitely go for it, but it definitely means you have to, you know, take it with a pinch of salt and try and understand that a lot of the information which we might have been fed might not be accurate, and that, you know, everything potentially has its use.
And science is always progressing. Why are we looking at science in the 40s, you know, when there's science to look at that's happening right now? It's ridiculous. Why would we be stuck back there when there is fresh information? Things evolve all the time. And, you know, what we know now about both cannabis and psychedelics is that they are really remarkably safe medicines and considerably safer than most other medicines that people are being given. And it's really all about understanding them, as you say. It's about harm reduction. It's understanding that with psychedelics, it's It's as much about the psychotherapy that you should get with the psychedelics if you're using it as a therapy as it is taking the substance. And same with cannabis. People benefit enormously from having guidance for using prescription cannabis or understanding properly how to use CBD oil even, not just, taking it and, getting loads of weed and smoking it. It's not how it works.
And that is where we have to leave it. Ruby, in your cafe somewhere mysterious in the United Kingdom.
Have a cappuccino for me.
Oh, no. Double espresso, please. Thank you very much, but nothing to eat because I'm on intermittent fasting. Ollie, as always, a pleasure. Ruby, it's been an absolute joy. Good luck with your writing. I hope you get loads more articles published. I really, really do. A force for good. We will be back same time next week, God willing. Until then, try and stay out of trouble. That especially means you, Ollie Mammon.